Donald Trump surges again in the 2024 election, now leading Joe Biden by a record 4% margin nationally. Compare this to Biden's 7-point lead in the 2020 election, and it seems almost inevitable that Trump will take back the presidency this November. The former president is also more popular than ever, significantly better liked than Biden, who is the second most unpopular third-year president in American history, only outdoing Jimmy Carter, who is destroyed by Ronald Reagan in his 1980 landslide victory. In this video, we'll see if Trump is set to be the next Reagan and what the national and state polls are telling us about the outcome of the 2024 presidential election. According to the latest national polls, Trump is crushing Biden with a 3.8% lead on the national level. Compare this to polling throughout 2023 when it suggested a very tight race between the two frontrunners. And back in December of 2022, Biden was actually ahead by 2.8%, his largest margin of the entire campaign. What is even more significant is that if you compare this to the numbers from 2020, Joe Biden on average led by 7.2% by the time Election Day rolled around, and he even peaked in the summer with a double-digit lead just 5 months before the election. In 2020, Joe Biden barely won. He underperformed expectations significantly, and when you apply what happened 4 years ago to the current polling for 2024, you'll quickly realize that Trump is in an unimaginably favorable position. Now, of course, when it comes to presidential elections, it is not the popular vote that counts, but instead the electoral vote and the electoral college that ends up deciding who the next president is going to be. And so I'm going to start off by filling in the map with the solid states for both candidates. These states are going to be irrelevant in terms of deciding who the eventual winner is actually going to be. Joe Biden and Donald Trump are going to easily win these states by margins of 12 percentage points or more, or at least something very close to that. These candidates are not going to go to the states that they're obviously guaranteed to win or lose, and that makes them pretty unimportant in the American electoral process. And so with these solid states filled in for both candidates, we have 181 electoral votes for Joe Biden to 125 for Donald Trump. Something else that's important to consider is just how close the 2020 election was. Yes, Joe Biden led by 7.2% in the polls, but if you look at the eventual results, he only won the election by 4.5%, underperforming expectations pretty significantly. When looking at the 2020 election map, we see that things do not get any better. Joe Biden only won the election because of 3 states: Wisconsin, Georgia, and Arizona. These 3 states all voted for the now president by margins of 1 percentage point or less. This makes them extremely competitive, and Biden won these states in an environment where he was leading by 7 points in the polls. So just imagine what would happen if the 2020 election was held in an environment where Trump was ahead by 3.8% in the polls. And so that is why things are looking so dire for the Biden campaign. That's why he's decided to restructure the way that he is conducting politics for the upcoming election. And that is why things are looking so optimistic for the former president. Now, coming back to the map, these states are all going to matter. They're all going to be competitive, and both candidates are likely to visit all of these states. Biden is going to make at least some attempt to win states like Florida, North Carolina, while Trump is going to do the same in states like Minnesota, New Hampshire, or Virginia. However, not all of these are really going to matter if we're going to be realistic. Joe Biden is still going to win states like Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Maine, while Trump is still the heavy favorite in states like Iowa, Ohio, Texas, and even Florida. Florida, for the first time, is not going to be a competitive state because of just how well Republicans have done in the Sunshine State over the last 4 years. Trump won Florida in both of his elections. The state is now run by entirely Republicans, and it doesn't seem like Democrats are going to take back the advantage that they once had in Florida anytime soon. Before we continue, only 14% of you guys are subscribed, so please take this time to consider subscribing and joining my Discord server where you can chat with me personally. Now, when it comes to the 8 states that remain, as well as the second districts of both Nebraska and Maine, This is what's really going to count. These 105 electoral votes are going to get either Biden or Trump across the finish line. Before these states are given to either candidate, we see the election is nearly a tie. That is just how polarized American politics has become. And so I'm going to start off with Nevada and move to the east and discuss the outcomes for both candidates based on the latest polling data as well as historical trends. So starting off in Nevada, 6 electoral votes. If the election is close, this could be make or break for both candidates. And when we look at past election results, Barack Obama flipped Nevada in 2008, winning the state by 13%. However, in both 2016 and 2020, Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden only won it by 2.4. This has made Nevada more competitive than it has been in the last 20 years, and Donald Trump currently leads by 5.4% in the polls, which means that he has a pretty significant advantage in the silver state. And so I do not believe that Trump can win it by over 5%. The polling is likely to over-exaggerate Trump's lead right now, and a more realistic classification for Nevada would be lean Republican. Joe Biden can definitely still win the state that he won in the previous election, but you would definitely rather be Trump than Biden right now based on the latest data. In Arizona, things don't get any better for the Biden campaign. Trump is currently ahead by 4.8% according to the latest polling. However, Arizona is a state that Biden was able to flip in the previous election. This was one of Biden's 2 major flips, the other one being Georgia. And so Arizona was not won by a Democrat in any presidential election before 2020, going all the way back to 1996. However, just look at this 0.3% margin and the 2020 election landscape. Biden won the election by 4.5%, and compare that to what's happening right now. If the polls are even remotely correct, Biden's 0.3% margin is going to absolutely shatter, and that is why right now, Nevada and Arizona are both very firmly in the lean Republican columns. Moving up to the Midwest and starting off with Minnesota, we have 10 electoral votes up for grabs, and this state is slightly more favorable for President Biden. According to the latest polls, he leads by 2.5%. However, that may not be enough for him to win, as this is a state that he won by 7 points by in 2020. A shift of 5 points in favor of Trump nationally would mean that Joe Biden would get smoked this November. And so Minnesota will be in the lean Democratic column, but it is currently one of the few states that are competitive where Biden is actually leading. In neighboring Wisconsin, the state is currently the closest out of all 50 states in the country. The polling average currently has Biden and Trump in a complete tie, both at 45.8%. Now, that might seem good for Biden. He is not behind in a close state from 2020, a state that he won by 0.63%. However, what's important to consider is the staggering lead that Biden had in the state 4 years ago. Joe Biden was supposed to win Wisconsin by a likely margin. He won it by less than 1%. And that is more than reason enough to put the state into the tilt Republican column. Donald Trump right now is polling nearly 8 points better than he was 4 years ago in the state of Wisconsin. In Michigan, things are significantly better for Donald Trump. This state is supposed to be more liberal than Wisconsin, but every single recent poll disproves that. Donald Trump is currently ahead by 5.3%, making the state a likely Republican state if we looked at just polls alone. In 2020, Biden was supposed to win Michigan by a 5-6 point margin. He only won it by less than 3. And so with Trump now ahead by 5 points, it is currently inevitable that he's going to flip the state. The state did just re-elect its Democratic governor, but Joe Biden is very unpopular in Michigan, and it doesn't look like he's going to carry the state for a second time in a row. So based on all the data we have right now, it seems inevitable that Trump is going to win back a state that helped him win in 2016, and that is why Michigan is going to be the third lean state in the Trump column. Move east just a little bit more and we reach Pennsylvania. There's a tiny glimmer of hope for the Biden campaign here. Joe Biden leads by 0.6% according to the latest polls from the Keystone State. This is the state that Joe Biden was born in, and the state has always had a soft spot for the incumbent president. Its 19 electoral votes are going to be crucial for Joe Biden, and so I could categorize this state as being tilt Democratic right now. It is one of the only states where Joe Biden isn't getting absolutely pummeled. It's a state he carried by 1% in 2020, and it's a state that before 2016, Republicans had not won, going all the way back to 1988. So Pennsylvania has a long history of voting for Democrats, and in 2024, it's a must-win state for Biden, and it's one of the only states keeping his campaign afloat. Now, before we move on to the states of North Carolina and Georgia, I'm going to get the second districts of Nebraska and Maine out of the way. I'm going to be nice to Joe Biden. I'm giving him the second district of Nebraska by a lean margin, and I'm giving Trump the second district of Maine by a likely margin. And so this puts Biden at 245 electoral votes to Trump's 261. As for the Tar Heel State and the Peach State, these two states were very close in 2020. Joe Biden won Georgia by 0.24%. This was the closest state of the 2020 election. Meanwhile, he lost North Carolina by 1.3%. And so, according to the latest polls from North Carolina, Trump is ahead by 9%. That is a staggering margin. And I did still choose to cover the state as a part of this list of the 8 most competitive because it is still likely to be close. I think 9% is a bit too much for Trump. However, when considering the fact that he's doing 11 points better nationwide, it is not all that surprising. So I am going to categorize North Carolina as likely Republican, but I do not believe that it will go to Trump by a double-digit margin. Finally, in Georgia, we have the closest state of the 2020 election. Currently, Trump leads by 6.6% in the polls, so the data doesn't suggest the election is going to be even close to as competitive as it was 4 years ago. And Georgia is a state that Biden flipped for the first time as a Democrat since 1992. Bill Clinton was the last Democrat to carry the Peach State, and Biden only narrowly came out with a victory from Georgia. And so considering Trump's massive lead as well as general trends between 2020 and 2024, it is definitely reasonable to put the state into the likely Republican column with North Carolina. The state has a very long history of voting for Republicans. It's also one of the historic red states in the Deep South. And so this will put Trump ahead at 293 electoral votes to Joe Biden at 245. Based on the latest polling, the latest data, it all suggests that Donald Trump is on a clear path to victory this November, unseating President Biden.